Hey everyone, welcome as people start filtering
Oh
on
my.
in. It is me, Nick Parrow, and Lisa J coming at you. Well, now Lisa Joy coming at you for our third or fourth, one of the two. Third, I think, so far, Dominion talk.
Yep.
Um, and we decided to come a little early because we just started the conversation and figured everyone else may as well join in with us while we were doing it. Um, and so, Lisa, do you want to reintroduce what you had just said to me?
Okay.
Because I think it's a great starting point for our conversation today, sort of on the perversion of things.
Yeah. RJ Rushdoony started an organization called Chalcedon Foundation. I believe it's Foundation. And anyhow, I was on Chalcedon's website today, and there was a thing about Zionism, and it's an interview, and so I started listening to it, and discovered that Chalcedon Foundation and Rushdoony were not Zionists. They actually consider that kind of an added in eschatology from the Schofield Reference Bible of, I think they said 1908. And that part, and I know the Schofield Reference Bible is kind of deeply embedded in Christian fundamentalism. So apparently they took Chalcedon and Rushdoony's love of Christian governance and then added in their eschatology from the Schofield Reference Bible in Christian fundamentalism as part of how this all goes. So, um, yeah, it's a little bit strange.
Yeah,
Uh,
so it's we I wanted to start here and I wanted us to start early because that was the interesting point in to me in a lot of this and in all of that was the perversion and sort of the
yeah,
bastardization of Christianity or even their own bad ideas and
okay.
making them worse and perverting them to a message which is kind of fits almost perfectly with the title of today's episode, which is The Church is the State. Um, and we're going to continue our conversation on Thursday with, as I've called it, The State is the Church. Um, because they've taken ideas that were meant to stay separate and were meant to be ideologically distinct, and they've mashed them into a bastardized version that is no longer ideologically distinct, but is all now just one ugly idea of Seven Mountain Mandates or Dominionism that even Rushdoony would have probably found appalling.
Well, he did. Rushdoony, though, he did advocate as far as governance goes. He
Yes.
advocated for the decentralization of governance and pretty much for churches to become governing agencies in their communities. So he Christian nationalists like that point too. So they feel
Yes.
like they just, and it's interesting because have you ever heard of, let's see, I've been done so much pre work this time.
No, I
Um,
love it. And I'm over here outside.
have you ever heard of Dan McClellan?
I have heard the name.
Okay. I just found out about it. He apparently does a TikTok and an Instagram arguing over points in the Bible that people get wrong.
Okay.
And it was interesting because he spoke a lot in this article I found on Mother Jones about how what really happens is people, especially people who are of faith, come to the Bible with their identity intact and they apply their identity to the Bible instead of letting the Bible be itself. And he says, he said, a rich person will read it and say, well, everyone else is wrong and it's okay that I'm rich. They'll just not notice the verses that condemn them and so forth. And like he was talking about, they now talk about toxic empathy and how there shouldn't be empathy in the Bible. And he said, there really isn't any place you can specifically ever find that. It's not right. But people are they're cherry picking, just like they do for everything else, and saying empathy is wrong because God told these people to smite everybody down to the babies and the livestock. So that's not empathy. So you shouldn't have empathy. And he says, actually, empathy is important because it helps us relate to each other and cooperate and grow as a civilization. But,
Which is interesting because it does, because that
oh,
is
it does.
because the key to civilization is community and
Mhm.
growing. We're tribal animals, we're tribal
Right,
creatures. So growing our communities and our tribes is one of the main things we're supposed to do.
right,
And so I mean, I get some of the reasons for, say, the bastardization or the more extreme applications of some of the teachings, because
right,
that is a way to, in their mind, grow their community because it's through the fear base. And I don't want to give them any credit because, they believe Rushduni and this whole concept anyway, still believed in the idea of dominionism. He was the
mhm,
founder of it. He's the one who didn't pioneer dominionism or dominionist concepts as like a baseline. He's definitely not the first there. There have been plenty who have been or would be considered dominionists even amongst the early church.
right.
Um, but
Well,
he's the one who yeah.
Calvin had
And
his
that's
own
where
community that he ruled as a Christian theonomy kind of thing.
and that's sort of where they get a lot of their ideals from, is the idea of Calvinism and
Right,
that dominion over man and over each other. And the rule of the church is always fundamentally more important than the rule of man,
right.
uh, which is one of the things the
I'm fine.
church is the state, is because that's one of the perversions. It's one of the main perversions in all of this that is seeped really, really far into American culture just in general, is that the um is that we have gotten rid of the idea or the concept that church and state are separate, because that
Mhm.
wall has been broken down and it's been
Yeah,
purposely torn down between the institutions. And no, we've not always had a perfect wall of church and state separation in this country. In fact, we've never had a perfect wall.
mm,
But we have had guardrails in place that they're fundamentally altering now,
yes,
um, and rewriting out of or out of our constitutional law or constitution or just general laws that guarantee us those
right,
pieces. And it's a coordinated effort on the idea of creating dominion over the government
right,
to instill a theocratic
right,
worldview.
right,
Um, So I think this is really interesting to get into some of the more nuance of where the almost Calvinism has come into
mhm.
it, or is this idea of, hey, so hey everyone.
Well,
But like, could you expand on that? Because you have much more knowledge from someone who's been
okay.
in this type of life before.
Well, yeah. It's interesting because I was starting to read um various quotes from him, and one of the things that he's famous for, and this of course goes to dismantling where we are. It says one faith, one law, and one standard of justice did not mean democracy. The heresy of democracy has since then wreaked havoc on church and state. Christianity and democracy are inevitably enemies. Christianity is completely and radically anti democratic. It is committed to a spiritual aristocracy. And one of the things that was taught in churches I went to that were teaching this was that the elect, now, this is a special concept in Christianity. It says that God actually picks out who becomes Christian, and they are called the elect. And the people that don't become Christian, well, God didn't want them. And the elect were a spiritual aristocracy. They were supposed to rule over anyone else. And of course, the males only ruled because women were supposed to be beneath everybody anyhow. But the church was supposed to take over the government. We were supposed to get rid of all of the taxes and everything, and that would go into a more religious type of offering system. It was frightening. because they totally disregarded everything that was constitutional. It was gone.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's interesting to see that type of like break breakdown in, or even just like understanding of nuance.
Mhm.
Because we have to remember that like this idea of Christianity, their version of Christianity, and the idea of dominion are inherently anti-democratic. And to them it is a known belief and known understanding that democracy is against what they want, because democracy encourages a plurality of opinion and thought and mindedness, that if you're in an institution that relies on fear and propaganda, you have to insular. Insular. They always stay closed off to change or growth in that way,
Right.
because it encourages women to vote or have a voice or
Right.
say things. It's the idea of Salem, where they didn't burn witches, they burned women who spoke.
Correct.
Um, and so like we have to remember that that's the concept, is it's it's all about protecting the insular, to me anyways, is that man inside.
You will recognize this from things you've heard other Christian nationalists say. You'll recognize pieces of this. Segregation or separation is thus a basic principle of biblical law with respect to religion and morality. Every attempt to destroy this principle is an effort to reduce society to its lowest common denominator. Toleration is the excuse under which this leveling is undertaken, but the concept of toleration conceals a radical intolerance. All of
So
those tolerant people are intolerant. Because we won't
yeah,
accept their Christianity as our rulers, we are being. The believer is asked to associate on a common level of total acceptance with the atheist, the pervert, the criminal, and the adherents of other religions, as though no difference existed.
which sounds awfully familiar to some of the words that Hitler used to say and usher and utter to his followers.
Yeah.
Um, and those are the words that have been used to kill a lot of people in history.
Yeah. Well, I'm sitting there thinking about how they talk about LGBT rights as increasing perversion and those kinds of things, and I'm like, wow, I wonder where they heard this. I mean, this man actually advocated for slavery.
Hmm.
He
Yeah,
said
and
that,
that's what it was going to bring me back to, was slavery.
yeah, and they actually, one of the things that they suggest is it isn't race based, though. Like the church from Idaho, that just started a one down in DC. That church is from Moscow, Idaho, and as far as I know, that's like a super white, only type of enclave.
Hmm.
There are a lot of actual white racists up there, and, I read about the fact that that was what was starting that church in DC, and it was like, "Oh my goodness, this is disgustingly wrong." We're gonna have to Sorry, I've
No,
got
you're fine.
really quick. Bye-bye.
No, family happens.
Yeah,
Isn't that
they
the whole point?
they were just here to switch out cars. Oh, love you too. But, I taught my son from a very young age. I taught him the I love you sign, so we could
Hmm.
say it to each other from distances and for a goodbye, and of course, now
We
she
do it a
knows
lot
it.
too.
Yeah. But, no, they honestly are. I've been struggling a lot emotionally because of how far things have gotten recently. Um, I'm scared about whether we have enough time because we don't have elections for over a year yet. And between the gerrymandering and the woman who got sued and lost over the gay marriage licenses, she went to She appealed to the Supreme Court. She has Liberty Counsel as one of her, and they're actually related to some of the Christian nationalists too, by the way. And she actually pretty much wrote an "I love you" note to Clarence Thomas and said, "You said that this wasn't a good ruling. Now you can fix it," as part of the appeal. They want to rule back everything,
Yep.
and
Yep.
they want to make us behave like Christians, whether we agree or not.
Yes. Yeah.
Mhm.
It's taking all that we ever learned about separation of church and state and perverting it into church is the state
Right.
and undoing anything that has to do with progressive laws for women, for any of those who are not, sorry, I was getting a phone call, for any of those who are not white, for any person who is different than their
Mhm.
ideal of a good Christian and or a good Catholic or a good Calvinist, to be
And
more specific,
you look,
in a lot of
well,
ways.
Calvin was Protestant. I'm not sure. I haven't studied him deeply enough to know how well he marries to Catholic, because, well, I don't know Catholicism
Well,
terribly.
they don't. I mean,
All right.
Protestants don't really get along with the Catholics in general, but the teachings of
There's
the
more like
dominionism, yeah, there's more like that they would ever like to admit, seeing as
there's a specific sub branch of Catholicism that is dominionist, just like there's
it's
a
JD
sub.
Vance's,
Yes,
which
J.D.
is what
Vance.
we kind of have to worry about. Is JD Vance is a dominionist Catholic. He converted to dominionist Catholicism just in time to prepare to run as a vice presidential candidate. He converted just in time to to give up everything that he ever claimed he believed in beforehand, because I mean, he's spineless and he's slimy and he changes faces all the time.
Yes.
Um, but he wasn't one who changed his faith very obviously in any other ways until he needed power.
Mm-hmm. I think I often wonder what it's like to be his wife. I mean,
Yeah,
she was in Yale Law School with him, and now she's a trad wife who barely ever gets shown out in public. And I just sit there and go, okay, you're an Indian, your parents are immigrants. They had to have pushed really hard for you to become successful, and now you're JD Vance's wife.
yeah, yeah. You
It,
give it all up to be this racist asshole's wife.
yeah, I don't understand. I can't make him make sense beside her. Not because I think it's wrong, but because I don't understand how they have their worldview match it. You know,
Yeah,
it's like
yeah. The
how did this?
There's a lot of cognitive dissonance, and I don't know if, and it's, I don't know. I can't look into the mind of JD Vance's wife,
No,
Usha, and go, I understand what made you flip that switch, because he used to talk about her lovingly and like as a spouse, and now he talks about her as property, as someone who's less than. Um, and just to go back a little, because you said something that I know often troubles me is we're over a year away from the elections still for
hmm
midterms nationally. And
right,
that being said, there are plenty of state elections
right.
coming up that are still meaningful and have the ability to keep things from getting too far out of hand on state levels. And that's
Right.
where it's really important, because they can only do so much damage federally, where the states at some point do have the whole concept of federalism is states have power too. And these people have been yelling about states' rights for long enough. Well, when states start using their rights, it's hard to tell them not to. Um, but I think what they're going to push as hard as they can in the time that they have. because they know that this is their only shot. Mike Johnson has said this. Mike Johnson has been open about it, and he's one of the biggest Dominionist believers in all of the Capitol. Like he flies a Dominionist flag outside his office. I don't know if he still does, but he used to. Um,
Apparently, the Chief Justice Roberts has one in front of his beach house.
yeah, yeah. Chief Justice Roberts has one in front of his beach house, and his wife made up a story about it, um, saying that they called the cops on somebody because their neighbor asked them or made a mean video about them to say that they should take it down. And there are a bunch of crybabies who have to play victim to everything because that's another thing in all of this is the victim mentality
Mm-hmm.
and how that's pervaded into our culture because of all of this.
Right.
And you can see it in Donald Trump. And
Yeah.
everybody in his orbit is, oh, I'm the victim. It's always somebody else's fault.
It's
It's always
weaponized
somebody else.
victimization. It's
Yeah,
weaponized. It's meant to be used to stifle dissent and to keep us from saying this is wrong. That's one of the things they love about the fact they're Christian nationalism is they get to claim that we're being religiously intolerant if we say anything bad about them. And most of what they believe is a heresy, anyhow. Yeah, it's like, let me just read the Bible to you, and then you can go ahead and complain about it.
yeah, yeah. It's one of those things. Like I love the book bans and the stupidity behind all of those because every time I hear a book ban, I'm like, isn't the Bible included in that? Like, there's more rape or abuse or murder in the Bible than there are in most other books. So if we're going to talk about having those things as things that our children should not be allowed to read or have access to at that age without parental consent, then absolutely the Bible should be removed. And in fact, in Utah, that's what happened.
Really?
I don't even think it was the Bible. I think it was the Book of Mormon got taken off the shelves in some of the schools because of it. And they had to backtrack because they're like, oh shit, our book got taken off of the shelves because of our own stupid idea. And I know it's a I know it's a bit crass, but one of the folks that I follow has a really good way of talking about it. It's called the double-edged dildo of consequences.
Okay.
Um, and it comes to fuck you from both sides. And I think this is one of those examples. Like the idea of dominionism in general is going to come back and do just that. Like Christianity in our country was slow, or religious involvement in our country was slowly dying, anyways.
Right.
Like it was slowly, people are
We're becoming
moving
increasingly
away.
secular.
Yeah, we're becoming increasingly secular, maybe not a-religious, but secular. Like the people are not identifying with a specific branch of religion or a specific faith denomination. They are taking faith at home or not having it at all. What I think this is going to do is it's going to do the exact opposite of what the Dominionists want, and it's going to bring about a further secularization of the country just as a backlash to the religious pressures.
Okay. You are not necessarily Christian and won't have known this, but back in the 70s and so forth, Baptist churches were really common. Well, Baptist churches, as the moral majority happened and all of these things were being associated with them, people quit being willing to go to Baptist churches. So they renamed them community churches and so forth and skipped the Baptist word because they were getting such a pushback and not getting people to come to church because of the Baptist label. So what you're actually describing has already happened to part of this group once, and they
Yeah,
didn't learn anything out of it yet.
no, no. And in fact, they probably did learn something, but they learned all the wrong lessons
That's
out of it,
definitely true.
which is they learned how to double down on the hate in a lot of ways
Yeah.
because you see some of the more extreme conventions of baptism coming out and becoming the spokesperson or the spokespeople for Baptists. like the Westboro Baptist Church, the Southern Baptist Church, like the more
Well,
hateful versions and iconography are now their
what's
common accepted versions.
what's scary about what you said is the Southern Baptist Convention is the largest Protestant denomination in the country. So you just took a very large group of people and said, "Hey, they're kind of dangerous," and a lot of them are. That's where I got a lot of the teaching that scared me was a Southern Baptist church.
Mhm.
And you look at the moral majority and you discover that there's racism behind that, which then adds more fuel for the white Christian part of the nationalism. Um,
So
and
when
it's
you were in, what types of teachings did they rely on to, I guess maybe sort of hook you on the
um,
ideas of it?
well, it's interesting. It's kind of like a slow boil thing. Um, what happened is it actually started in Denver, Colorado. A pastor taught me that the Old Testament law was good for you because God created you. God knows how your body works. So all of the instructions were meant for your edification. And you start being told the Bible is beneficial. It's the best way to run the world. It's the best way to run your life. And then they just slowly keep going back to that and saying, and the Bible tells us this, and the Bible tells us that. And, it's like some people will tell you that the one in Leviticus about males together, that actually the two words are different. And one means male and one means boy. And that every time that a a homosexual type of thing is discussed, it's always in a place of power against the powerless. It isn't just about consensual, it's about rape, to be honest. And so, people will sit there and they keep pulling these texts and they'll pull them out of context, they'll retranslate them, they'll do whatever it takes and say, the Bible says this, and we know God is good and God wants what's best for us. And there's just this slow, constant, pressure, and Rushdoony was a big antagonist as far as state education. He said, you need to educate your children at home, need to teach them from the Bible, you need to teach them biblical values, da 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 da. And a lot of people in the churches I've been to all homeschooled. So you have kids who are being raised and they don't have the same history education. They don't have the same constitutional expectations. And they are being told again and again, God knows everything. God's the best. We're going to do this for God. And it just boils. It's the frog coming to the boil. You end up assuming it's the right thing. And it's all you ever hear because everyone is part of your church. Because you don't go to public school. So you didn't get exposed to any of the other ideas out there, short of, sneaking onto the television when your parents aren't looking or something. You don't know anything that they don't tell you to know.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I mean, that makes total sense.
It's
Um,
really scary that they have people like that.
yeah. No, I mean, it makes total sense. And it's probably I mean, it is, I guess, one of the main drivers behind a lot of the homeschooling movements
Mhm.
and continued pushes for homeschooling, and where a lot of the groups, like my wife and I, when during towards the end of COVID, when everything was just, we
Yeah.
moved around, and we traveled, and we didn't stay in one place. We got an RV and we drove around and we traveled, and um, we gave our kids a homeschooled education. And one of the things that we found for the time that we were doing it was, it was incredibly hard to find a homeschool curriculum that was not religious.
Mhm.
Um, and it's really hard to find one that is not religious that is also accredited in any sort of good
Mhm.
ways. Um, and yet, most of the religious ones that you find aren't accredited either in any good way. They're just the most commonly used, and they're the ones that you find all the examples from and that everybody goes to because they've
Right,
been
yeah.
marketed so well. Um,
My oldest son had to catch up, so he ended up in our churches. We actually had a church's cooperative homeschool. So, like, we
yeah.
actually had grades, and different parents took them and so forth. And, So my son, he ended up missing a lot of school, and his mom had custody one year and he was kind of like promoted and didn't know anything. So we pulled him out and put him in that school for a year because it was self-paced, and he caught up everything. But I can remember it was a very much Bible-based, it didn't have a whole lot of history in it. It was all Bible verses and what Jesus wants from you, and da, da, da. It was everything went back to the Bible. English lesson about the Bible. Math lessons, they're using biblical terms. Yeah, it was ridiculous.
Yeah.
So biblically soaked. And they're very common. I think one of them's called ACE. And I think it's ironic now with the descriptions we have for sexuality, because this is like 2002. No, it was 90. Oh, wow. It was in the 90s somewhere. I lost track of how many years I've been around.
It's okay. We all do that.
Yeah. But my oldest son, he he went for 1 year, and that was still an anxiety thing. And it was called AC. They called him AC. And now with the whole sexual thing, that actually has and back then it was just, 'cause he was aces because he was so smart. But I'm like, yeah, there's this one called AC, this curriculum. And I'm like, oh my goodness, that is not that's obviously a very old curriculum now.
Yeah,
I
it's
don't think
funny.
they use that.
No, and it's like, or I like that they get mad about like the rainbow, but it's the Christian groups that are always like, oh my God, we're gonna steal the most like iconography thing and say it's ours. So like we're the Rainbow Learning Center where everybody's welcome, except we're not,
And you're not
because
welcome if you're the wrong race.
yeah, you're not welcome if you don't fit A, B, and C. So the rainbow's really actually all in black and white. And if you're not white, then it's black, and we don't want any of that. So go over there with your rainbow. It's why I figured out it has nothing to do with Dominion. Well, it does have stuff to do with Dominionism because it's like seeping, it's the cultural seep of what they've been doing in the background. It's the trad movement and like the trad wives
Trad
and
wives, yeah.
Melissa Corrigan. We had her on the show, me and Lawrence Winterman yesterday morning talking, and she mentioned the term soft girl, which is like the pre-pubescent to teenage version of trad wife,
Oh, wow.
which teaches you to be a trad wife
Oh,
up until you
yeah.
get pregnant, and then you realize that nothing is soft after you get pregnant because that man that you were told is going to take care of you and be godly over you and rule over you decides that just the ruling part is the important part and doesn't care about anything else
And you
and just
did covenant
rules.
marriage, so now you're stuck
And
with him for
yep,
2 years because you still have to prove, and if you can't prove that he's abusing you or whatever, you're stuck with him anyhow. Yeah.
yep, yep. And
Doing to kids.
yeah, and it's the thing that I noticed that one of the trends that I noticed that seeped in a long time ago, especially during the COVID time, was the sad beige baby stuff. And for those who didn't have kids or don't have younger kids at the time, was they started introducing very monochromatic colors and like very beige based browns and tans and ba and light tea, like just base colors. Just
Mhm.
it looks like a builder grade wall or like base pinks. Like they took all the vibrance out of the color and they muted everything. And it's sort of what I envision what all of this is anyways, is just it's a muting of like the inherent colors or goodness of people that they have inside because you're sort of stuffed into this ugly little system that only lets you be tiny little version of yourself that has to
Right.
fit perfectly. And that's really what they want is little automatons who think just like everybody else and who don't question the system that they're in.
Well, yeah, the questioning is definitely not allowed, because in fundamentalism, every word in the Bible is literal, And when you try to argue that with them, because the truth is, if you start doing any type of biblical criticism study, you start learning that there are different types of literature in the Bible. There is myth and legend, there is poetry, there is allegory, and they all have different levels of uh, literalness, let's put it that way. But according to fundamentalism, every single word in the Bible has happened or will happen. So you've got mountains that sing and trees that are jumping and all sorts of things because God can do it. And it allows them to pull things out of context, allows them to put you in very rigid little boxes that you can't move out of at all because there is no, when you've got it in black and white, the gray's gone. And it's just,
So what, as someone who's broken away from something like this, who's
Mhm.
broken out of a system of this type of rigidity and structuredness, what have you found that have been the most helpful tools that maybe other people could use to help their loved ones if they're stuck in systems like this?
well, what took me away was actually a uh, a child essay scandal, and I ended up in another church that was much more progressive, and they loved me. And you don't get unconditional love in a church like that. There's too many rules, and you break any of them. In fact, if you get sick, they want to know what sin you've committed because obviously God's punishing you for something if you get sick. Or it's maybe for God's glory, but usually it's what did you do? And there's always backfighting in those kinds of churches. And I showed up barefoot at this church, and I told myself after having come from the other kind of church, I'm like, so if they mention my bare feet, I will know this is not my church. And I walked into this church barefoot. I did the whole service barefoot. And I don't know if you've been in Christian churches, but if you've been around them enough, you start recognizing there are other people besides the pastor that have some sort of prominence or just the way people talk to them, the way they care, you just recognize them. And one of those people happened to be behind me. And so I turned around and they were having a potluck after church. And he's like, my wife and I brought enough for 3 families. Don't worry, please stay, da da da. And I said, I showed up at this church without any shoes on and waited for someone to say something. I said, I'm just surprised. And he goes, oh, you mean you didn't just kick him off under the pew like all the other women do? and and I was away from my ex, but he had moved into my garage. This church loved me so much. My ex, I was trying to get out of my garage and was struggling to do that. And he said to me, "Hey, I've got this person who I applied to stay with since I'm renting for you." He wasn't paying me a dime. He said, "Can you give them a good reference?" I'm like, I can't lie to these people. That would be terrible. Friday comes, I haven't heard from them. I've been trying to figure out what in the world I would say. And my ex calls and says, "Thank you for whatever you said. I get to move in immediately." And I'm like, I didn't say anything. That next Sunday, this little old hunched over woman comes up to me and she gets both of my hands in hers. And she says, "We got rid of him for you." They knew who he was. They knew his reputation, but they wanted to help me get him out of my garage apartment and rent it to him, knowing they might be trashing their house doing it. And
That's
having a safe landing spot with acceptance is how we're going to get a lot of these people. Now, they have to also understand where they're really being misled on scripture if they have any interest in being a true follower of Jesus. I'm sure some of them have to be wondering, because I know I did, between my knowledge of the Constitution. The one thing that I was not taught in that group was I was not taught prophecy except for where they tried to paste current events to it. And it wasn't until I got away and was in a different kind of church entirely that I started reading that God said his justice was care of the widow, poor, orphan, Alien, Defender of the, all of that. I'd never heard that. And I was in my 30s and I had never heard that because they skip it. I once said to somebody
Convenient.
in a comment, I said they got to all the begats in Genesis and said, this is boring, and switched to the last chapter to see what the ending was. And they just skipped everything in the middle. Um,
I've heard that before. I feel like I've heard that before because it's true.
it's like begat. Oh, forget it.
Yeah. Begat to the end. Okay, we begat the end. Yep. God and God said, "Let there be light." Yep.
We're
Good. We
done. We're
did it.
done.
We did it. Yep.
Yeah.
All the
But
rules.
skip all the rest of it. But
Yeah,
yeah,
not important.
yeah. But yeah, I really miss that. And so letting people know what they are missing or what they're not being told anymore. Because a lot of them have at least read, the Sermon on the Mount, and it's like, blessed are the poor in spirit, blessed are. And another place he actually says, blessed are the poor. He says that rich people can't get into heaven any easier than a camel can go through the eye of a needle, you know? And people are not hearing that now. They're being told politics from the pulpit, not, you know, Christianity. And somewhere they've heard something in Sunday school or something along the way. They have to be wondering, am I really not supposed to care about other people? Because there's nothing that's totally antithetical from Christianity.
Yeah, and aren't a lot of the psalms and the hymns that are sung in churches, in usually not probably not in a lot of these ones, um, aren't they typically about loving others and lifting others up? And the word of God is a lot of caring.
It's interesting because have you heard some of the criticisms against praise and worship music?
No, not directly. I
Okay.
mean, I've heard criticisms of praise and worship music, but probably different ones than you're
Well, maybe
talking about.
not. There are people who say that it's actually very much created to be almost hypnotic, and it's very repetitive, and it becomes almost more like a chant than anything else. And a lot of the songs are like that. And I mean, I'm just thinking like one of my favorite songs was "Lord, I Need You" by Matt Maher, and it's a very nice song. It doesn't have much about being nice to other people, but he has other songs. I was a bit of a Matt Maher song fan when I was doing Christian praise and worship music. He had one that's called "Love Will Hold Us Together," and it's so much fun. And so there are good love your neighbor type songs, and there are, but a lot of them end up trying to be very hypnotic, very much about an emotional experience, because the emotional experience in worship then binds you to everybody else. You have this shared uplifting experience together, and you reinforce it every Sunday then. And it isn't like the old hymns. In fact, he's now very disgraced because he apparently was doing things with little boys. But Chris Rice, um, he did a whole thing on hymns, and he talked about how much theology was in the old hymns. And there isn't as much theology, I don't think, in the newer stuff all the time. It's much more about trying to make people have an experience and trying to sometimes some of them like to mirror popular music. So you have a Christian experience and it's the taking over the music and entertainment. It's one of the seven mountains. And
Yep.
they've been working on that one for at least since 1970s that I know of, probably earlier.
Yeah. I mean, you can see that on a big scale in terms of the music industry. So I
Mhm.
I listen to
Me
a
too.
lot of metal and like
Mhm.
and rock music. Those are just genres I very much enjoy. And there are two fairly large bands that there's actually more than two, but a couple now that you don't always associate with either with Christian rock or with um yeah, just with Christian rock in general and spiritual music is POD,
Mhm.
um, 1,000 Foot Crutch,
Yeah.
and Skillet are
Yeah.
three. three major bands that are
She is
Christian,
amazing.
and they're
The
yeah.
one woman on Skillet. Have you seen all the instruments she plays? It's
No,
crazy.
I was supposed. I think there was we were supposed to see them live, and we weren't able to. There was a conflict about it. I don't remember why, but we were supposed to see them, and I've heard they're amazing. But at the
Yeah.
same time, too, now I go, should I be listening to that? Should we be listening to like mainstreaming that type
I I have
of
to
music?
admit,
Because does it bring about then the mainstreaming of genre of Christian rock music that may not be harmless? Because Christian rock music inherently can be harmless. Like it's not,
can be.
it doesn't have to be, oh, convert to Christianity or you're gonna burn in hell in a lake of fire. Like
Right.
it can be a very uplifting message.
Right.
There's some incredible uh, religious musicians out there who have
Mhm.
incredibly strong and wonderful messages out there. But does it?
I
Does it also help
agree.
mainstream others that are
I
less?
I have worried too about. I'm like, I've actually gotten to the point. I'm like, I should take my favorite ones and research where they stand on some of this. That one guy that got kicked out of Canada, pretty much. He's actually Apostolic Reformation, so he's part of the NAR, and so he's definitely someone you don't want to be listening to. But
Mm-hmm.
you look at some of the more mainstream ones, like my son loves Red. Have you ever listened to them?
Mm-hmm.
Um, because they're another Christian group,
Yeah.
but they aren't terribly explicit or anything, And uh, I'm gonna. I cannot pronounce. How do you pronounce his name? I don't know how to pronounce his name.
That'd be Sean Fuke,
Yes, the last one, Fuchs. I mean, everyone was calling
maybe.
Sean FKD.
Yeah,
Um,
it's close.
um, but yeah, he apparently, I just read this today. He got kicked out of Quebec, right? So an indigenous nation offered to host him, and they had a trailer for the females, and they offered him a pop-up camper. And he apparently went and looked at the accommodations and turned around and left because they weren't good enough for him. After having his big fit about not being allowed to play, and he literally emailed them from leave after leaving. And he, of course, has not said anything about the fact that he had over 200 people waiting to see him and said, "No, I'm not going to sleep at a pop-up camper," and left.
It's it's very self-centered
Oh, it
in a
is.
lot of ways
It's all
on it.
about
Yeah,
power. It's not about
it is.
faith.
Yes. Yeah. So
It is.
that's one of the things that kind of scares me in the idea of like mainstreaming um religious based music just in general. Not just, and I don't say Christian rock to point out Christian rock by itself. I say Christian rock because we live in the US and that's the predominant religious group here.
Yeah.
And they're the predominant group that is creating an alternative music genre to subvert the
What about country
others.
western? Country
Well,
music's been Christian the whole time.
I'm not gonna. Well, you make an interesting point there. Well, no, country hasn't always been religious. The modern country has. Almost all
Since
modern
the
country has.
60s, you go back to at least
Ye-
the 60s, and they're still Christian. Yeah, I mean,
But if
Johnny
you go
Cash
even
did more than one Christian album.
You're right, but if you go even
Elvis too.
further, if you well, Elvis is a bad example. I don't want to use Elvis as a good example of anything that's morally right or responsible because his wife was a child when he married her. So let's not go there.
Well,
I
I'm just
think there's
saying
a reason.
he did a whole bunch of gospel albums. Elvis did.
Well, I mean, it sort of fits. There's probably a reason why Trump idolizes the guy and wants to be like Elvis. Um, but I think if you even look further back in country music, it's not based out of religion. It's the originations of country music aren't, but like the the more modern influences that have rolled into them through R&B, through various different cultural changes over time, through increases in the power of the church or ebbs and flows of the power of churches in these areas. I think Christian music has been very pervasive in country music, but it's not specifically country because country is folk music. Is based out of folk music.
Oh
Thomas, you
yeah.
put down an interest question mark there on the end of folk music, but I agree. Is country is founded out of folk music in a lot of ways, and folk music is oral tradition and is in a lot of ways pagan
Mhm.
in nature or origination. Um, and I think country music stole folk and turned it Christian. And I think that's really where we get our idea of country now, is we hear Christian country rock and we
Mhm.
go, yep, that's country music because that's all it is.
Which
Uh,
is
yeah,
Jesus.
Jesus, take the wheel. Gosh, yeah, and and every time somebody started like saying something stupid back when that song was newer, we all used to be like, yeah, please, Jesus, take the wheel and just crash this fucking car and like maybe they'll get ejected and we'll be all right because they'll be the ones not wearing this seatbelt because they're going, Jesus has got this. And you know what? Jesus ain't got this. Jesus ain't got it. He ain't gonna hold you in place. He ain't gonna get you that hug of care as you go flying through the window. So
There there was this really
Jesus,
bad,
take the wheel.
well, it was
That's where we
badly
are as a
applied
country.
Bible study back in the wow, probably mid-90s called Experiencing God. And there were people who'd get so excited by the whole Experiencing God thing. There was this one family that apparently sold everything they owned and got a camper and started driving their camper and then ran out of money and started calling family members because they both quit their jobs and decided they were going to go on the road for Jesus with no real plan because they were going to follow what God wanted. And it's those people are out there right now voting for Trump. It's
Hmm.
kind of where they came from, probably. It's it's scary because if people don't think critically about what their religion is telling them,
Yeah.
this isn't any religion because you end up in a cult before you're finished, which is what MAGA is. So then again, um, but it's amazing how quickly you can pull somebody into the abyss with just the right beginning of conditioning.
Yeah. Yeah, and
Yes.
I think that's a really good word is conditioning because
Mhm.
you went through conditioning as a
Oh yeah.
child and as a young adult and up until you broke away and had and were moved until you were moved from
Yeah.
your church and given an opportunity on accident to you, because what happened to you is not something that is an act of God. It was an act of a person attacking
Right.
you. And that attack led you accidentally to a place where you were able to break away. And I'm not a person who's going to ascribe all things happen for a reason because not everything happens for a reason. Like that's not something that happens for any sort of reason because that if when we start ascribing that, that belittles your experience and
Okay.
lessens the impact of what at least to me it belittles other people's experience
Right.
and it lessens the impact of what somebody else did to cause that experience.
Right.
um and so I would say it happened, and because of that experience you were put into a situation
Right.
that allowed you to be free,
Mhm.
and thankful for that
There's a
because
good 2 decades since then where there's been once I got farther away. In fact, there's a thing called deconstructing evangelicalism, Tim unfortunately is on vacation, and his partner refused to let him take a day off of vacation, so we don't get him back till September.
Good for his
But
partner.
yeah, he's because apparently that because I kept going. Well, we haven't heard back. Yeah, I'll talk to my partner in a bit, and and finally, I guess they got enough moved into the new house. They had the discussion, and he was yeah. It's like
But we're
that's
gonna have him on about it because
yes, we are
that's
going to have him
important.
on. It is, and a lot of people that are in that position, they're also in the Leaving MAGA, and there's a really good Substack about that, by the way. It's called Leaving MAGA, and these people, like I said, they need a soft landing. They need, and I've been advocating for that from the beginning. I mean, that's why I wrote about my favorite MAGA voter about my husband because they need a soft landing. They need a place that they can come to, and they're not going to have us sit there and say, "You caused this mess."
Hmm.
Because many of them have been conditioned into it or they were misled, and then there were the ones who were just wanting to get cheaper eggs. They were sadly misled people, but,
Yeah. And I
um
think it's the ones who were conditioned into it that are going to be the ones that we have to give a soft landing to
yeah.
in reality, because they're the ones who are lied into it and who
Yeah.
were told that this was the path and they were trained
Doing God's
or
work.
yeah, they were, and it's something that you hear pretty much all cult deconstructionists in general say is you have to give people a place where they're welcome, because
Mhm.
if you don't, they are going to run back to the thing that they know
Mhm.
best, which is the destructive thing.
Right.
In this case, which is MAGA or is just
The
nationalism in general or
Catholic
abuse.
Church or whatever.
Yeah,
Yeah.
or whatever it is, it's we have to give them somewhere that's welcoming, but
And
it's
it's
a it's not for it's not forgetting, it's forgiveness.
no.
And because we don't have to forget that they did
And
something and that they did bad things, but we don't have to throw it in their faces all the time.
socially, okay, I joke, but it's probably possibly partly true and probably even more so now that my relatives think I'm going to go to hell. Okay, so when these people that we actually get out of this come to us, they are going to be very socially isolated because they have lived in and grown up in and been part of this little place. And they're going to be in culture shock because in their world, a lot of this stuff almost doesn't even exist. They aren't told about it. They just, they go to church. Church tells them what the world is. They come back. It's like the people who didn't know that ICE had arrested a veteran at his job, dragged him out of his car, and lost him for 3 days. And he was a U.S. citizen. They didn't even know about it. They're like, what? That never. I'm like, yes, it did. Look up
Mhm.
this person's name. You'll find it. And they're like, no, that's not happening. Yeah, it is. There's so much that they aren't even hearing. And so they're going to be,
It, and
there's,
it's and it's going to be hard. It's going to be
oh,
hard because not only have we been driven to the precipice of the destruction of our country, which is like in itself a huge thing, but we're also at the precipice of destroying a ton of families just in
mhm,
general on top of it too. Like the next step here in the rabbit hole that this goes down is the destruction of families in a way that hasn't been seen since the Civil War.
yeah,
And that's the important thing is
people
since the
taking
Civil War
sides.
is people are going to take sides, and the way that we prevent people from taking sides is by creating a side that's welcoming for
Mhm,
you to come back to without having to admit that you've been lied to up front, because
right,
that's really a lot of these folks don't ever want to admit that they've been lied to. It's cognitive dissonance because, like you said, they've never heard the truth before,
right,
but accepting all of the truth all at once means that they have to be willing to accept that their entire worldview has probably been a lie.
right.
And I don't know about you, but being told my entire worldview is a lie and then having to accept it and be okay with it is a lot. Like
Yeah.
that would be a lot to come handle as a as like one person, like
Yeah.
on your own, by your own, and then not go back into those lies that are so comfortable.
Not
So you
only that,
have,
but if you're like my age and you did it to your kids,
Mhm.
it's interesting because I had these rules that there were things I didn't agree with. So literally, I would unteach my children the whole way home from church. And that's been something that's happened since they were little. And it's created children who really aren't Christian, but that's okay because they're good people.
Which makes them, I think, equally as Christian if they were to view it in the eyes of just the ethical teachings,
Ethics. Right.
the ethics of it, because I am more Christian than most Christians. I'm
Mhm.
not Christian, but I'm more Christian than most Christians because I believe in the ethical teachings, and I was raised under Judeo-Christian precepts
Mhm.
and values that taught me that other people are worth valuing, that we look out for the neighbor and our neighbors and those around us because that's what we do and that's the right thing to do. And it's
Correct.
morally right and it's just intrinsically right. And yes, there might be a heaven or a hell that you go to, but that's for after you're dead and for you to worry about then and not while you're here. What you're here to do is just to be good and do the good things. And if you do the bad things, to learn from them and grow.
Right.
And so we have to take the bad and
Mhm.
the good, not just the bad with the good, but the bad and the good. And then we have to shift the bad and rotate it and give people a perspective that they're not used to, challenge their beliefs and their
Mhm.
systems without attacking them.
Right.
And that's hard, but it's also really doable. And it's you challenge somebody by breaking their connection to that belief in a way that they're unexpected, that they don't expect. And if you
Right.
do that, you sever something that they can't bring back.
One good way to start a journey is to ask them questions. You don't sit there and say this is wrong. You ask them why they believe something
Hmm.
and where they learned it from. And if they get a few of those at a time, I sadly use what I learned in Sunday school, where you plant the seed and someone else waters it and someone else harvests it. And that's kind of how we have to look at reaching people that are in this
Hmm.
is you ask questions and someone else might ask them another question, or they might finally see a news article that challenges what they think really is going on. And you just you know, let it build up
Yeah.
for them. You
You
don't,
let the seeds grow. And
yes.
it's sort of been part of the topics of the haikus that I've been writing the last
Hmm.
couple days. And that's why I use it in civics a lot, is the idea of seeds and the
Right.
idea of farming and growing, because it it really doesn't have much other parallel to it that works so well. Like
Right.
farming, the idea of caring and nurturing, and I mean it's like parenting, but parenting is much more personal as a human, and it's so much easier to separate it into a concept of farming without the weight of guilt. And you
Mhm.
separate the idea of shame and guilt out of it. And I think so far for me, farming or words like that bring about a resonance that other people cling on to. And from a biblical standpoint, the Lord is thy shepherd
Mhm.
and thy shepherd guides the flock and helps
Mhm.
keep them um, moving and guiding them forward, not always keeping them out of danger, but protecting them from the danger and guiding them away from it.
Mhm.
And those are the lessons we could learn without some of the more aggressive pieces behind it.
Yeah, I agree. Um, it's almost 4 o'clock.
Yeah, shall we call it at we're getting to the top
Sure.
of the hour. We started
Yeah.
a little bit early. Wow, we have quite a few of y'all with us today. Thank you.
I
Um,
got 3 books I want to buy when they come out.
we have tons of information. We're going to be back again
Yep.
on Thursday
Stay at 3
at three,
our time for
um,
Central.
3 Central, so 4 Eastern, 3 Central. And we'll be coming back again to talk more about the church is the state is the church.
The church will be the state this next one.
No, this one was the church is the state. The
Okay.
next one is the
State's going to
state
be
is the
church.
church.
Ooh, I will be ready with more
So let's see what we
interesting
can
things
think
to
about
learn.
how we can come talk and think about
Yeah.
the church and the state,
Yeah.
and keeping them separate, maybe.
That would be much
So,
better. Gotta read my
Lisa,
history again.
Lisa, it was great talking to you again today.
Nice
Thank
talking to you
you,
too. See you
everyone.
on
Thanks for
Thursday.
being in the chat. We'll see y'all on Thursday.
Bye bye.
Bye now.